So, yeah, we find two things. One is that we assume we know. And so, I don't need to ask my wife or my coworkers what they believe about something. I can already tell, I can already anticipate what they want, so I don't have to ask them. But the other is sometimes we think it might be awkward to ask or redundant or we ought to know. So, I might not ask my wife what she wants for Christmas thinking that I ought to know. And it would be awkward.
Bad move. I would ask. Just saying it, Nick.
You're right. You know the data without perhaps even the data.
I've worked with some of my coworkers for a long time, and I'm pretty sure I could tell you what they'll think about a project or how they'll react to an opportunity. But my guest today says we don't know the people we're closest to as well as we think we do. And more often than not, we're hesitant to ask them some really deep questions. Welcome to Work Better, the Steelcase podcast where we think about work and ways to make it better. I'm your host, Chris Congdon, and my guest today is Nick Epley. He's a behavioral scientist at the University of Chicago, and he's the author of a book called Mindwise: How We Understand What Others Think, Believe, Feel, and Want. Nick is a leading researcher on how we understand each other, or more often, misunderstand each other. And Nick shares why small talk matters a lot more than you might think, and why we should ask our colleagues some hard questions. And he gives us ideas for how to do that. He even argues that talking about touchy subjects like religion and politics might not be that bad. Here's my conversation with Nick. Welcome to Work Better, Nick.
Thanks, Chris. It's great to be here.
I am so interested in your work, so I am really glad that you joined us today. And I want to start with asking what might seem kind of like an obvious question. You spent so much of your work life studying social connections and how people relate to each other. And can we just start with the basics about why do social connections matter so much, and particularly at work?
Yeah, so it does seem like an obvious question, and yet it's sometimes surprisingly hard for social psychologists to answer that one. Why is it social connection makes us feel good? There's kind of the long arc perspective, which is that for most of human history, being connected to other people was essential for survival. That we couldn't live on the planet without having other people around to offer protection and help and support. And so it was necessary being connected to other people for survival. So our well-being, all of our reward infrastructure in our brain was finely tuned to how well we're getting along with others. So more in daily life, though, our connections to other people provide sources of support. They provide conversation. Conversations are generally interesting. They offer help. In general, we do better when we're doing things with others than when we're doing things on our own. And so that's why connection's important.
That makes so much sense. And I want to probe deeper on all of that. But I've got a question that I've just got to get out of the way before we get into it, because this was a topic of conversation with my team over lunch. And as I was learning more about your work, I came across a paper that you wrote, and the title shocked me. So the title for our listeners is called Misplaced Divides: Discussing Political Disagreement with Strangers Can Be Unexpectedly Positive. Now that surprised me because I feel like everything I've learned in life has told me to avoid those conversations, particularly at Thanksgiving dinner, or at work. Like, stay away from things like religion and politics, because that's, when Uncle Charlie is going to go off the rails over dinner. So I'm just really curious about what you found in that research.
Yeah. Well, so I'll describe the research and then I'll talk about Uncle Charlie.
Okay.
So in our research, and it's important to constrain what it was we found. So in our research, we found that people essentially have exactly the same intuitions that you do about what talking about disagreement will actually be like. So in these experiments, we had people have a conversation, and it's important to note these are dyadic conversations. So you and I are talking one-on-one. It's not my people and your people. It's not us and them. It's you and me is what it is. One-on-one conversation. And we pair people up and we tell them that you're either going to have a conversation with somebody about some important political topic. We had 12 different topics that they could discuss, things like abortion rights, gun control, support for Donald Trump, belief.
Easy topics.
Yeah, easy stuff, right? The stuff you talk about always at lunch, right?
Right.
And we paired you up either with somebody who held the same position you did, that is, they were on the same side of the issue as you were, or they were on the other side of the issue that you were. So if you were a Trump supporter, you were talking to somebody who was not a Trump supporter. If you were in favor of abortion rights, you were talking to somebody who was pro-life, say, and was not in favor of abortion rights, okay? So you went into this interaction knowing the other person's view, and we asked people just to predict essentially how the conversation would go with somebody they agreed with or disagreed with. And they, not surprisingly, thought that talking with someone they agreed with would be more positive experience than talking to somebody they disagreed with. Mm-hmm. But those expectations turned out to be wrong, at least when people were having an actual conversation with the person. So in our experiments, when people had a conversation with somebody they disagreed with, an actual one-on-one back and forth conversation, they enjoyed it as much as talking with someone they agreed with. And two things happened here in these conversations. One is you learned that people who disagree with you aren't quite as crazy as you imagine. So one thing that happens in conversation is we establish common ground. We find the parts of the issue that we can talk about in a way that's coherent. And it turns out our view of the other side is that they're just less reasonable than they actually are. So that's one thing we learn when we actually talk to people.
Sure.
The other thing we learn when we talk to somebody is that we go back and forth, and the actual act of having a conversation is pretty nice, almost regardless of what you're talking about. It can be at least a dyadic conversation.
So, I mean, my takeaway from that, Nick, tell me if you think this is right, is that like if two people can have a conversation about a really difficult world issue, it seems like if we're working together, you know, sometimes there's conversations that we avoid.
Yeah.
But maybe if we actually have the conversation instead of like writing the email or something that feels like a monologue.
Oh God, yes.
Like maybe
don't write the email.
Yeah, don't
write the email.
or write it and don't hit send. Just, you know.
Fair enough.
Exactly. You know, like we ought to be able to have those conversations and maybe have them with a little less fear and anxiety.
I think what really stands out for me in this work is that what governs our willingness to have conversation with people and what we're going to talk about when we have these conversations are our beliefs about how the conversation is going to turn out. And if our beliefs about how the conversation is going to turn out are spot on, then we'll do great. We'll know what to talk about and what to avoid. But if they're off, and in particular, if we systematically underestimate just how positive conversation will go, real conversation, particularly when we're willing to have it, then it kind of creates a tragic experience of avoiding conversations that you ought to be having,
right,
that would make you better informed and better, you know, understand somebody's different, would pull you and connect you more with somebody who you might never have a conversation with. And otherwise we're mistakenly avoiding those, and that's tragic.
So I want to ask you about another thing in your work that I also found fascinating, is just this idea that our perspective about like what we know about other people, but it may not be what we think it is. I mean, I think I'm pretty good at knowing other people. I think a lot of people might feel pretty confident about that. But from your research, if I'm understanding it right, that maybe we don't know people as well as we think we do. Like even people that we've been in relationship with for a long time. Can you talk a little bit more about that?
Yeah. So I study mind reading for a living in most of my research. I study how we make inferences about each other's thoughts and beliefs and attitudes, and mostly how we screw that up and misunderstand each other in lots of ways. And one of the most reliable results in our work, I would say, over the many years is a finding of general overconfidence. We are the most socially sophisticated, or we are at least among the most socially sophisticated species on the planet. We think about the minds of others in ways that many other species do not. And yet we're not perfect at this. This ability to think about the minds of others operates quickly, rapidly, almost as effortlessly as we blink. But the challenge is that we don't know what we don't know about other people. It's not just unique to other people, that's unique to lots of things. And what that means is that because we don't know what we're missing, we don't know what we don't know, we tend to be overconfident, right? Like there are things, for instance, I do know about my wife. We've been married for nearly 30 years. That's a long time. There are lots of things that I know about my wife, but even after 30 years, there are lots of things we haven't talked about for whatever reason.
Sure.
Right? Experiences we haven't had. I mean, I don't know. I've never gone surfing with my wife. How do I know whether she would? I've got some good sense about this, but maybe she would enjoy it in a way that I wouldn't have guessed because we've never done that together before. So even with somebody you know well, there's just lots of stuff you haven't talked about or you don't necessarily know. And that means that we can be overconfident. We think we know more about others than we actually do.
Well, and I can think of a million examples. I've been in a long-term marriage too, and things that continue to surprise us, or I didn't know you thought that, or I didn't know you felt that way. Again, I think about like in work. So for our listeners, as we were preparing, our producer, Katie Pace, and I were talking about how long we've worked together, and we think we know each other pretty well. But I wonder if maybe that overconfidence that we might both have is maybe preventing us from learning some things. Like I might assume that Katie wants to take a particular opportunity, but maybe she doesn't. You know, and is that something that happens a lot, do you think, Nick, that we just assume we think we know what our colleagues want or believe?
Yeah. So we find two things. One is that we assume we know. And so, I don't need to ask my wife or my coworkers what they believe about something. I can already tell. I can already anticipate what they want, so I don't have to ask them. But the other is sometimes we think it might be awkward to ask or redundant or we ought to know. So, I might not ask my wife what she wants for Christmas thinking that I ought to know. And it would be awkward.
Bad move. I would ask. Just saying it, Nick.
You're right. You know the data without perhaps even data. What people are happiest with are when they get the gifts that they want. And the best way to know what somebody wants is to ask them what they want. That's it.
Yeah.
Full stop.
For sure. Well, so I want to play this out a little bit more because I think, particularly in recent years since the pandemic, we've been in situations where maybe it's been easier for us to avoid conversations.
Yep.
And I remember at the beginning of the pandemic where, I was miserable almost from day one because I wasn't hanging out with my people. But I know a lot of people were saying, oh my gosh, it's kind of a relief to be at home. I don't have to do small talk. I don't have to do that, coffee or drinks after work or whatever socialization thing you do. So I can just do my work. I can go into those Zoom or Teams meetings and just do the work, and I don't have to have that part of my job. And I'm curious, what your research is showing about that kind of scenario where people are maybe not working together in person as much anymore. Like, how does that change the way we're interacting with each other?
Yeah. So let me say a few things. So first about the working from home versus being at work. And so in general, these are hard effects to analyze out in the working world because how much you enjoy your interactions at work depends on the quality of your interactions at work some, right? So
Sure.
Right, I really love my colleagues here at the University of Chicago, and so I missed being with them. But not everybody is in an environment with right. I worked on a cement crew in the summertime, and and those guys were pretty rough on me. I don't miss being sworn at every day, right? So people vary in what their coworker experience is like, right? However, in general, research makes it pretty clear that when we spend a lot of time alone, it's just less positive than when we're with other people. Even small talk,
Yeah.
people actually experience better typically than not engaging at all. There's a recent analysis from the General Social Survey. This is by Liz Dunn, a psychologist at the University of British Columbia and one of her PhD students, where they find in the General Social Survey that every single activity that people report doing, these are hundreds of different activities in different categories. Every single activity people reported on average feeling more positive when they were doing it with somebody else than when they were doing it alone.
Yeah.
It just being around other people feels positive in general. It's easy to track that, right? So sometimes we remember bad interactions we've had and so on, and that kind of governs our memories for what experiences were like. But in general, when we're around other people, it's more positive. And data has shown that over and over and over again. Now, the working from home part, again, gets a little more complicated because if you've got family at home who you love being around, right, your home environment is a little different than work. But it's not necessarily that the absence of other people is bliss. On average, it's not.
Yeah. Or it might be kind of a short-term bliss, like it sounds good
Momentary,
first,
yeah.
and then it's like, no.
Yeah.
So let's just keep on this track for a minute longer, because one of the things that we've also seen as a big shift in patterns of behavior at work is work being very screen-based. Like,
Yep.
We are spending so much time on screens. And, one of the things that we've seen in our research, and it drives me a little bit crazy, honestly, is people who could be in the same building but choose not to get up from their desk and go meet with somebody in a room or over coffee, but they just stay and they're on screen. That's not always the case, but I mean, we are so glued to screens. And I'm interested if you found anything in your work, particularly as we begin using AI more and more in the types of work that we're doing. How does the screen help or challenge the way that we interact and the joy that we get out of that interaction?
So screen is complicated. Screen also includes things like typing to each other rather than talking to other people and so on. So one of the things that we have found is that how people interact with each other matters quite a bit for how they feel about the interaction and also what they think about their interaction partner. Okay? This is not necessarily screen-based, but a lot of what we do with screens is we type to each other, right? We type emails, send text messages, right? It's pure semantic content. It's words, right? And words can communicate great things, right? So they can be very, very useful for certain things, but words also lack a lot of things. And what words tend to lack are some of the cues that actually create connection between people. And also convey, frankly, your inner humanity. They convey the fact that you have a mind. Okay, so let me explain that. So we find that when people type to each other, they feel less connected to each other than when they talk to each other. They don't necessarily anticipate those effects. They actually think they'll feel equally connected, whether they're typing or talking, but they're wrong. The voice contains something in it that creates connection. Part of that is the fluid back and forth reciprocal interaction you have when you're actually talking to somebody that just isn't present with typing.
Yeah.
You don't have quite the back and forth reciprocity, a little bit with texting, but not as fluidly as talking. The other thing that talking contains that typing doesn't is stuff that many speakers don't even notice in conversation. So
like what?
Well, so you just did it right there. So first you went, right? That wasn't an actual word. Right.
No.
And then you're laughing too, right? So there's a lot going on. Psychologists refer to this as back channeling. You just did it right there, right? So not an actual word, right? But that back channeling is a little bit like, the drummer in the band that keeps things going, keeps the beat and the rhythm of a conversation going, through that back channeling, yeah, okay, laughing, all of that stuff, you convey that I'm understanding what you're saying, I'm getting what you're saying, I'm with you, I'm attending to you, okay? And that's gone with typing. So when we ask people, for instance, our MBA students, to give an elevator pitch to their most desirable company, the company they most want to work for, explaining why we ought to hire you, Mr. Mrs. Chicago Booth MBA student, they actually think they're going to be judged a little more favorably when they type to the person than when they talk to the person. When they say their elevator speech, it actually goes precisely the opposite. They're seen as being more thoughtful, more intelligent, more rational, more emotional when you hear what they have to say than when you read exactly the same words in text or when they even write an elevator pitch. And as a result, we find that these MBA students, when they're evaluated by Fortune 500 employers or by folks imagining that they were interested in hiring this person, they think that the person they hear from is more employable than the person whose pitch they read.
That is so interesting. I feel like I am learning so much from this. And so for everybody who's listening, Nick, are there some best practices that you would suggest? Are there one or two or three things that you'd go, like, these are ways for you to develop better relationships with your colleagues?
Well, so yeah, there are a few. So one is to that there are certain flags that you ought to be aware of.
Okay.
And just be willing to test. So almost all social interaction, right? I decide whether to talk with you or not, what to talk about or not. Almost any aspect of social interaction is a choice we make about whether to approach or engage with somebody or to hold back and avoid them. Right?
Right.
And you can feel that tension inside you, right? Somebody comes and sits down next to you on the plane. Mm-hmm. Maybe you'd like to say hi, but maybe it'd be a little weird. I don't know if they really want to talk, right? That's approach avoidance, that conflict there, right? And the things that lead us to approach are desirable aspects of the conversation. I think this might go well. And the things that lead us to avoid are the things that we might fear going badly. And what we find time and time again is that those avoidance voices are stronger than they ought to be. That typically interaction goes better than we expect it will, and that other people respond more favorably when we open up and reach out to them than we imagine that they will. And so when you've got that little voice in your head that's saying, I'm not sure if they want to talk, I'm not sure if they want to engage,
right?
Check that.
Yeah.
I just, you don't have to believe me that this conversation is probably going to go better than you think. Just test it that next time, right?
So like if I'm walking down the hall and I run into the CEO and I go in my mind, oh, she's really busy. She doesn't have time to talk to me. Like just smile and wave and keep moving. Instead, test it and say, hi, hey, I was really interested in what you had to say about XYZ.
Absolutely.
Something like that.
Another good example. So this is a habit that I have taken on here at the office where I'm at right now. So, often I'll walk by people's offices and you won't want to bother them, right? Because you don't want to bother them, right?
Right.
But that means I'll pass offices with folks sitting in it and won't interact with them. What I've done now is when I come into the building, I get in here usually pretty early, about 8 o'clock. I'm coming in. People are kind of getting ready. They're not in the middle of stuff. I've taken on the habit of just saying hi to pretty much everybody I go by. Not everybody, but pretty much everybody. And just go by offices. Hi, Virginia. Hi, Jane. Hi, Emma. Hi, Eric. And usually I'll get a hello back right away. And it's become sort of this daily ritual. It just feels really nice, right? Mm-hmm. But I hadn't done that for years because I assumed, people won't say hi back. They won't want to be bothered. They'll be. Yeah. And I make a lot of friends around the office that way, just by saying hi a little more in ways I wouldn't have otherwise.
I love that because it's so easy to do, just to be able to ask a simple question or to just, again, say hi.
Yeah.
How's it going this morning?
The other thing, too, is to be willing to go deeper in conversation than you might otherwise.
What does that look like?
So ask the questions you really want to know the answers to. You said people, during COVID were happy not to have to engage in small talk. Well, you don't have to engage in small talk now. That's up to you what you talk about, right?
Right.
When I sit down next to a stranger on a train, for instance, or like yesterday, I was walking to the train with my neighbor. I asked, how are things going with you guys these days? In a way that was clear that I meant it. Like, I want to know.
You wanted to know, not just how you doing.
How are you doing?
Yeah.
And it turns out she was going to have a really hard day because the company she was working for is downsizing, closing an office. They had a big corporate meeting. They were worried about layoffs. This was a very hard day for her, right? I ended that walk with 2 hugs for her. Right? That was a much better conversation because I was willing to take a genuine interest in her and ask the questions I wanted to know the answer to, right?
Yeah.
That creates meaningful connection. So ask.
Okay, well, I'm going to ask you one more question because a lot of our listeners are thinking about physical environment. In fact, a lot of the work that we've been doing at Steelcase is around the idea of using physical design of space to try and create a sense of community with people. So to try and create that sense of, I'm part of a group that cares about you. We have trust, we have shared accountability, et cetera. So I know you're not an interior designer, but if you had advice for us about things going on in the physical environment that could help enable those kinds of interactions, what would you tell us?
So I would think about 2 things. One is design for dyads, a little more than we might otherwise. Connection really happens one-on-one when 2 people are talking or, kind of small groups, less so in big conversations. Every now and then, you get a group of 15 people together and the conversation will be good. But typically the conversations are best when they're dyads, when they're small.
Yeah.
You can actually attend. So I would think about designing small first and foremost.
Right.
People will choose to isolate themselves if you let them. And I think that's something that might be potentially surprising to many people, or at least maybe to designers, that because we're somewhat anxious about engaging with other people, particularly strangers, folks we don't know, if we have the opportunity to choose to isolate ourselves, we will. The problem with loneliness and disconnection out of the world isn't that it's foisted upon us. It's that we choose it. We choose to stare at our phone rather than talking to the person sitting next to us. So if you create environments that kind of necessarily funnel or channel people into connection so that we're not just choosing to isolate ourselves, but rather we are channeled into spaces that connect us, that'll create more connection. I'm at the University of Chicago in the Booth School of Business building right now, which is a beautifully social building. There is a large atrium right in the middle of the building, big open glass ceiling, where everybody naturally gathers, and you have to because all of the doors into the building go through that space.
Got it.
Our hallways up here have chairs in the middle of them where we can sit down and talk with each other very easily. And so it's designed with funneling people together to connect in mind, and it works wonderfully.
Well, I am so glad for you because not everybody has that same experience. So I think that's one of the things that I think within kind of our community here that we're thinking a lot about, how we can just make it easier for people to make those connections and to not feel that sense of isolation. Nick, I am so grateful that you took the time, because I know you're busy, but took the time to have the conversation. I would happily sit next to you on an airplane and try not to be the person that talks too long, but at least enjoy having that time together and having the conversation. So thank you so much for joining me today.
Yeah, thank you for having me, Chris. This was really fun.
Improve the hybrid experience for your team with the Ocular Collection. Unique table shapes improve sightlines to create a more equitable experience for in-person and remote meeting participants. Discover the benefits of rethinking your hybrid workspace with Ocular at steelcase.com/ocular.
So it turns out that striking up a conversation with a stranger or Asking our coworkers real and meaningful questions might be more beneficial than we think. Because better relationships at work will lead to better, stronger teams, and that's ultimately better for business. So before you go, please share this episode with a friend or a colleague, and be sure to follow us or visit us at steelcase.com/research to sign up for the Work Better weekly newsletter for workplace research and design ideas delivered right to your inbox. Thanks again for being here, and we hope your day at work tomorrow is just a little bit better. Thank you to everyone who helps us work better, including our producers, Katie Pace, Rebecca Charbowski, Stav Kontas, Chiara Licari, and Brandon Lasik. We are thankful for the creative art direction by Aaron Ellison and Emily Cowdery, and for the editing and sound mixing by Soundpost Studios, and the technical support by Mark Caswell, Sean McManaman, and Jose Jimenez. Our digital publishing is by Areli Ariano and Jordan Marks.